We're going to move into our next panel titled Fire, Floods, and Rebuilding. Rural Texas was walloped by fire, floods, and other natural disasters this year. How are communities rebuilding and preparing for more frequent and dangerous storms? Our panel today includes James Henderson, a fourth-generation Texas Panhandle rancher. He operated packing and processing plants in Texas, Colorado, and Uruguay for 35 years. Henderson helped to start the intercollegiate meat judging contest at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo in 1980 and served as superintendent for 34 years. He has served on numerous boards representing the cattle industry for decades, and he was named an honorary member of the Saddle and Sirloin Club at Texas A&M in 2015. Andy Holloway is Hemphill County Extension Agent, Texas A&M AgriLife. He's a fourth-generation Texan and spent 35 years owning a cattle marketing company and ranching himself before he lost all of his cows in the drought of 2010 and 11. That's why he is in the position he's in, a position he's held for 11 years in Canadian. Sidney Brown Murphy was elected Polk County Judge in 2015, previously serving as Executive Director of the Livingston-Polk County Chamber of Commerce for 6 years. She was elected I-69 Alliance Chair in 2018 and has been advocating for the advancement of I-69, including the fly-in meetings in Washington, D.C. Thomas Tunstall is the Senior Research Director at the University of Texas at San Antonio Institute for Economic Development. He is the principal investigator for numerous economic and community development studies and has published extensively, including op-eds in the Wall Street Journal. Most recently, he completed a project in the Coastal Bend region of Texas, mapping supply chain networks in the wake of Our moderator is Jamie Lozano Carver, South Plains and Panhandle reporter for the Texas Tribune. She's the Tribune's first Lubbock-based reporter, covering the South Plains and Panhandle through a partnership with Report for America. And with that, I turn the program over to Jamie.
Thanks everyone for joining us today and online. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to start with you, Andy. Of course, we talked about the wildfires that happened in the Panhandle earlier this year. Can you tell us a bit about how the area is looking now?
So, Jamie, I'm going to use just a discretionary moment. Is that all right? Okay. So I'm going to put on my hat. James and I, as traditional ranchers, were always taught by our fathers and grandfathers to take your hat off in a building. And I got in trouble if I didn't. And being Aggies, we really had to observe that, right, Judge? But I want to put my hat on just a minute, Jamie, because I want to say thank you to the Texas Tribune. And I particularly want to take my hat off to the Texas Tribune in respect. Nick came shortly after our wildfire in February and spent quite a good amount of time with me and many others in my community reporting on the tragedy that we had in our community and our region. The largest Texas wildfire in Texas history, 1.1 million acres. And my county and the county to the west of me, Roberts County, were 900 and something thousand acres of that 1.1 million. We were in the epicenter of it. And without the reporting of the Texas Tribune and other media outlets throughout the nation, actually, national and local media outlets, we would have never collected over $6 million in what I call loads of hope from Texans and people across our nation from 30 different states. So thank you to the Tribune, thank you to all of our media, thank you to all Texans, to all of you here and those of you listening, from the people of the Texas Panhandle and my county particularly. We are grateful for all the help and assistance and the loads of hope that you brought to us during this tragedy. So now I'll get to your... So to take off on that, the fire was at the end of February. It actually was called the Smokehouse Creek Fire. It started in Hutchinson County near Stinnett, Texas. It actually traveled over 48 hours, 100 miles across the Texas Panhandle, taking in 4 counties, Hutchinson, Gray, Roberts, and Hemphill counties. And as it came east, it got bigger and bigger and hotter and hotter. And in my county, it burned over 70% of Hemphill County, 53 homes, 7,000 mother cows that were within a month of having their babies. And for those of you that aren't familiar with beef cattle production, the cow is the factory, and the calf that she has is the cash crop that the rancher has or the farmer has to sell. And so both the factory and the calf crop, the income was taken away from our ranchers. Just 12 miles down the road from me, one young rancher who had just gotten out of Texas Tech about 5 years before this fire lost 712 cows, and he only owned 713. All but one of his cows were taken. So it's been a rough time. And to compound the fire, we've had a historic drought again, similar to the drought that took me out of business in 2010 and 11. And because of the fire and how hot it was, and 2,500 miles of fences that were destroyed, 53 homes that were lost, some of my 4-H kids that I get to train, their homes were lost to the fire. It's been a rough time in our region. But Texas is a place known for tough people. Right here in San Antonio, where the Patriots stood up to Santa Anna's army and fought like hell. Our ranchers are fighting like hell to survive and to prosper again in the future. So I tell people often that every day is a little better than the day before, but it's a long road of recovery. Thankfully, about the 1st of October, it began to rain. And in the last 45 days or so, we've had about 7 good inches of rain. And that's going to make a real difference. Of course, our growing season's over, but at least, James, we're going to bank that moisture to go into next spring, and hopefully we'll grow some grass next spring. So over $6 million worth of hay and feed and fencing supplies. Over $4 million in financial donations were brought, and I'm bringing that up for this. I also want to take my hat off and say thank you to the Rural Funders Association, of which the Amarillo Area Foundation in Amarillo, Texas is a member. And without the Rural Funders Association, we would not have received a lot of the money that we've received to help us in our rural communities recover from this wildfire. So thank you to the Rural Funders Association, that's one of your sponsors here today.
And I want to also ask you, Judge Murphy, we saw another disaster happen in East Texas this year with flooding from back-to-back storms. What can you tell us about how the area is looking now?
Well, first of all, thank you all for inviting me. I appreciate the invitation, especially since I'm up here with all the guys again. Polk County also sent hay and supplies because we do also have ranchers and farmers in our area. And over the last 8 or 9 years, we have been through a historic tornado, a historic freeze where the temperature got down to 8 degrees, which East Texas is not used to. I know these guys are more used to that, but we're not. And then we've had multiple floods and hurricanes and so forth. So during the flooding that occurred in April, for 6 weeks, we had multiple inches of rain a day. And part of what happens is the water, when it goes down into the watershed, especially for the Trinity River, then it gathers in Lake Livingston. And that dam is equipped to handle up to 300 cubic feet per second. So stop and think about that. A cubic foot is 6 gallons, 6 to 7 gallons, depending on who's measuring it for you, per second coming out of that dam. And so, needless to say, everybody below the dam is going to get flooded. So we had several hundred homes that were impacted. And the big challenge that happens with that is you'd be amazed how many people you ask them to evacuate, you do a mandatory evacuation eventually, and they still tell you, I'm going to be fine. But then 2 days later, they want me to send out your sons and daughters to rescue them or deliver water and food. I'm like, we're not an Uber. We are there to save lives, we're there to save property, but in the process, we're not going to endanger someone else's lives and endanger someone else's property. So it's a huge challenge. Now, Texans also have a tendency to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, help each other as we can along the way. So we did have a lot of support. I will say this, for the state of Texas, our Department of Emergency Management, I would stack them up against any other state. They activate as quickly as they can under the circumstances, and depending of how wide range the impact is. In our case, the impact was 20, 30 counties that were impacted with those rains. And so the resources are more limited, the manpower is more limited. We had 95% of our population had no electricity, like zero. So we had to focus immediately on those people that were oxygen dependent, that were on machinery of some kind or needed that kind of assistance. We were able to get it done. It took a while, but nevertheless, the Department of Emergency Management was there, our neighbors were there. We're slowly working our way towards recovery, and we're trying our best to get people to move out of those flood-prone areas and not go back to the same location in terms of construction. The wildfire was not something that comes every 3 to 5 years where you can plan on it or look at it or decide. The flooding is different. You know where the floodplain is. You know that when a hurricane comes, you're going to get water. Now the question is it going to be a foot or is it going to be 50? That's really the only question in terms of areas that flood.
And Tom, I'd like to hear from you. What does the road look like whenever it comes to the economic side of recovering from these disasters that can really devastate small communities?
Well, the disasters can come in many forms. Matt mentioned in the intro, for example, that we had just recently completed a supply chain mapping exercise for the Coastal Bend region. Hopefully we'll be invited to do more studies like that. But that's one of the biggest problems associated with natural disasters is the supply chain disruptions. And, the impetus for the research started out as a result of 3 hurricanes in close proximity to each other, most notable being Hurricane Harvey. And so as part of our analysis, we actually started to look at the types of things that can disrupt supply chains. And it's funny because some of them we never anticipated, and that's, I guess, maybe part of the fun of the exercise. But I mean, between pandemics, hurricanes, Winter Storm Uri, which you mentioned, I don't think anybody saw that coming. Tariffs actually are on our list. War, there's just all sorts of things. And the list keeps growing. And so, you know, what we've endeavored to do is to try and understand what the events might be and how they might impact supply chains, and hopefully, you know, figure out ways to, you know, assuage the impacts. I think you've got a question for me about resilience later, so I'll hold off on you know, further discussion. But supply chains are intimately related with natural disasters. One of the things they found out after the hurricanes, for example, was that relief efforts often impeded the ability of communities to react, to respond, because pushing all these relief supplies through existing supply chains caused almost as many problems as it you know, was attempting to solve. And so it's just some interesting dynamics associated with it. And obviously, you know, if it seems likely we can expect more of them to come, more disasters to come, you know, we need to find a way to be prepared for it. You know, one of the interesting things about the natural disaster issue in general, if you look at graphs associated with the volume in terms of dollars, those have been increasing. And there's more than one reason. The obvious reason is, well, we're seeing more, maybe because of climate change or whatever, we're seeing more natural disasters, and so that's why the numbers are going up. But it's also, it's not clear to what extent inflation is factored in there. But one of the biggest reasons simply has to do with the way the fact that we're building more people coming into Texas. The U.S. in general, the population of the country is growing, and we tend to want to build in areas vulnerable to natural disasters. We like views of the ocean. We like to live on hillsides, and between floods and wildfires and hurricanes and other events, you know, the situation's getting worse, partly because we're just growing, but again, you know, external factors, climate change, weather, whatever, are exacerbating that situation.
I can add to that if it's okay. Unlike the counties that were up here earlier discussing how they were having a brain drain and how they were losing population, Polk County is in a very unusual situation, I guess I should say, because with COVID, we had a paradigm shift. We had a lot of younger professionals move into our community because they could work from home and they could just commute a day or two a week, and then they come back. They come back to a rural area with plenty of nature, plenty of green space. And I think that's the key, green space. I think that these larger cities, they base their structure on concrete. Okay, well, where is the water supposed to go? And so you build more homes, you build more houses, you build bigger malls, bigger structures, and a lot of those structures are built in areas that are vulnerable, just like he referenced, which is the same thing that happens with us in floodplains. And then we have not allowed for Mother Nature to absorb the water, for Mother Nature to detain some of the things that are happening. The reference to Cedar, okay, which is like, you might as well splash oil and gas on something and call it good. So I think part of what the state government and local governments need to focus on is what are some of the resilience factors that should be built into our economy. I think every single large city should have a giant green belt that goes around it and through it to absorb water, to stop, to create a fire break, to do all of those things that nature does all on her own.
And on the topic of resiliency, James, I'd like to hear from you. You know, we see a lot of these times, you know, in the wildfires, for example, that ranchers were out there trying to put the fires out on their own land before first responders could get out there. I'm curious if you have any ideas or ways that you could see ranchers being more prepared or more resilient than they already are.
Well, let me back up just a little bit and say, first of all, you've heard over yesterday and today numerous references to the wildfires there, and I don't know that anybody's ever, we've experienced a lot of wildfires in the Panhandle. I think nothing probably like this spring was. And one of the nights when the wind shifted from the north, even though we were considerably south of those fires, you would have thought the ranch was on fire. Just, you couldn't see from the smoke and the things that were going on and the confusion that was going on in that point in time. Probably the most interesting observation from someone that did not go through the experience of losing grass and cattle and houses and barns and all of those kinds of things was the observation of everyone being in shock. I'm sure that happens the same as in a flood. They are literally clinically in shock. And one of the things is I begin to try to say, okay, what can we do to help to recover? The first thing that you had to deal with was just the emotions. The first 10 days after that fire, the biggest need in that area was bullets, because you had to destroy the livelihood of those folks of what the fire didn't kill, that was not able to. And that's a tremendous amount of grief and a tremendous amount of pain. And so you first got to deal with those kinds of emotions in that effect. And then I'll say, be careful what you ask for, because as I begin to try to say, what can I do to help? I ended up being appointed by the Speaker of the House to the committee to investigate the wildfires, and that's led into a whole career I never intended, in being able to try to deal with the aftermath and the resiliency of those fires. And we found a lot of things. There's a tremendous amount of pride in Texas. And the immediate thing was when you would go to those ranchers, and our business is different than most of those who burned out in that we're in the genetic seed stock business. We supply genetics to those guys who raise cattle for consumption. And people say, well, you weren't burned out. Why does it affect you? Well, there was about 20 of our customers that buy 80 to 100 of our bulls a year that burned out. That may be 4, 5, 6 years before they're back to buying those kinds of bulls. That's a pretty big impact in our piece of it. But as you begin to try to figure these things out, and as we went through the committee hearings and investigating the fire, and we peeled back layers and layers and layers of this stuff, the problems and ineptitudes between the state agencies that there was astounding. And as the legislature looks forward, we have to find ways that all of these state agencies can at least communicate, because they were stumbling over each other and in the way. A big part of the time, everybody with good intentions, everybody was trying to help, but there's no coordinated system in being able to try to put these things together. And so the resiliency of the ranchers, those guys, as we would talk to them, they would say, no, we don't need any help. The guy down the road, he lost more, his house burned, go help him. You know, and that was almost to a person. So the pride factor, you had to go, look, you know, I understand there's other people with needs, and we're going to go help those folks. We need to help you too. And, you know, trying to get through that part of the emotion and so forth to get to the single steps of saying, because the magnitude was so large, when you've lost everything that you've worked your entire life for, and you're standing there looking at it, you go, where do I start? You know, what do I do? And just the help of saying, let's go get feed for what cows you have left, you know, make sure they're taken care of. Let's figure out how we hold, because all of your perimeter fences are gone. How do we get it to where those cattle can stay in place? What do we need to do on a longer term basis? And you put all of those pieces together and begin to rebuild. And I'll say the communities in the Panhandle, Canadian, as an example, there's no place in the world probably could respond better than they did through this and the organization of all of that. And it was amazing to stand back and watch the responses of those people and the outpouring of that kind of support. But the economic impact in an area like the Panhandle, where all of these rural communities are interdependent. There's not any one that's a silo by itself. We all do business in numerous communities around those areas who specialize in anything. And as we lose a big part of that, we jeopardize the whole and that whole economy. And so it's extremely important that we are able to create an environment where those areas can recover.
I'm curious, and this can be open to anybody on the panel. What do you think needs to change in how government agencies respond to these type of situations? Not a loaded question at all.
How many hours do we have? Again, and that's part of, I have spent many hours since that fire in trying to overcome numerous of those things. And we could give example after example after example, but what we found was none of these agencies ever talked to each other. If the Forest Service was responsible for investigating the origin of the wildfire, they took that report, put it in a file. The fact that it started off of an oil well site or off of a power line was never passed on to the Railroad Commission or the PUC. You know, and so there was no way to go back and try to present something or prevent something from happening again, because there was no way that they ever knew that it happened there or what the responsibilities were in those kinds of things. And like I say, I probably name every state agency that there was had some role in living in their own silo. And so the first thing that we have to do is find ways to break down those silos so that those agencies know how to communicate and work with each other. We can pass all the legislation and put all the money and all those kinds of things, but if we don't work together and work with each other, we're not ever going to be successful at responding to these things.
So I'll respond to that just a little bit. Not that I work for a state agency, and so I've got to be careful what I say.
Now he's defending himself.
But I will say, as a member of the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service, that we are thankful for the 143 volunteers that came, and through the organization and the management of our team to put those people to work, we wound up having a model. And our county judge, Judge Murphy, has been told by many other judges around the state that Hemphill County's become a model for the efficiency and the management success that we had in Hemphill County, managing literally thousands of semi-loads of cattle cake and loads of hay and barbed wire and things. And our objective was to get it out to the people. And so James said something I want to, when somebody would say, and this has been said to me 10,000 times, take it to my neighbor, we're doing okay, go down to my neighbor, he needs it worse than I do. Well, we learned, James, that was code words. They need it just as bad as anybody. So I'd say, well, Joe, we've got 2 loads of hay coming to you today. Just get your tractor ready to unload it, because whether you want it or not, it's coming. Well, you know, later on, we found out that Joe really needed that hay, and it made a big difference. And so it does take a lot of organization. But from my point of view in my county, and I can just speak to my county, I'm proud of the fact that we had a well-oiled machine, and it worked extremely well. Wendy mentioned earlier about she worked with my wife, who is my coworker, and the household side took care of many, many people that lost their homes. And it was a huge task. But one of the great things about America, and it doesn't matter how we vote or who we are or how rich we are, how poor we are, or what we look like, when the chips get down, we're still Americans and we still come to the aid of one another. And that's what we experienced over and over and over. And I call all that, again, loads of hope. And Judge, I know y'all have experienced loads of hope.
I can respond to that as well. I think that, and certainly I was not on an investigative committee for this, but I think that that there is a certain level of structure. I can't speak to what the level of structure looks like at the state and federal level. I do know there is always, no matter what kind of emergency management situation you're in, there's going to be some frustration with other agencies or the speed of delivery for things, but nevertheless, planning. I think that if you have a good, strong emergency management plan, then you don't then you go through your checklist, but it doesn't need to be a plan that's just sitting somewhere on the shelf. So obviously, his county judge followed the plan. Because if you have a good plan, not just as a county or a city, but you know what? You should have an individual plan. If something happens, where are you going? What are you going to do? Do you have a copy of your passport? Do you have a copy of your credit cards? Do you have a copy of your driver's license? Because if you have to all of a sudden leave home, then grab your sack, grab your Build-A-Bag, and take it with you, because you can always get on the phone, get a hotel reservation, do what you need to do. Well, your county or your city should have the same preparation, and that's what we do. That's how we respond. And we have responded to emergencies where, the National Weather Service is saying, here she comes, here she comes, here she comes. Oops, she arrived with a hurricane. But we also had a tornado that nobody predicted, slightly short of an F4 tornado, that wiped out 800 structures in 15 minutes. They were gone. And when we went up in the helicopter and we looked down, it looked like Mother Nature had taken a weed eater and laid down timber that was 100 feet tall. So you have to be ready like that, but you need to be prepared as a community, and you need to be prepared as an individual, and you need to be prepared as a state. But all 254 counties make up that great state of Texas. So we need to all be prepared. We need to be prepared to lend a hand, but we also need to accept individual responsibility along with responsibility for our communities.
And we will start taking questions from the audience here in just a moment. If y'all want to start lining up at the microphones at the front. And really, I want to ask you, Tom, for our last question on the panel, just in terms of being able to look at these disasters, months after the fact, what are some of the valuable lessons that communities can learn in how they can recover?
Well, I look at it sort of more from a systematic standpoint, but over the past few decades, we have built these incredibly complicated supply chain networks, the things that allow us to undertake daily living. And that works fine as long as things are moving, the ports are open, and everything's working the way it should. But as we found out, if COVID strikes and the ports back up, or we get a hurricane, or you take your pick of natural disasters, suddenly that super efficient supply chain doesn't function the way it's supposed to anymore. So the emphasis increasingly corporations, companies are taking is to look at least equally at resilience and reliability. And that's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of reshoring that's occurring to sort of simplify some of the elements of the supply chain. And when I say reshoring, I'm not just talking about the US, I'm talking about our partners in Canada and Mexico, and even South America, Central and South America, because all of that complexity kind of goes out the window when circumstances change on the ground here in the US. And so I think it's important that we continue, and we've seen, the current administration has been taking steps in that regard. Certainly the incoming administration plans to do similar sorts of things to try and bring more of the production of the things that we use, the things that we need, having inventories on hand, for example, which is sort of anathema to traditional supply chain theory. You want to have as minimal inventory as possible. And again, that works fine as long as everything's functioning smoothly. But if there's a kink in the works, then, I think entities, and whether it's, companies or governmental organizations, need to sort of have some things on hand in stock and ready to roll out in the event of disruptions caused by natural disasters.
Okay, and then I will turn it over to Matt for questions from the audience.
So we have a couple folks with questions here. We'll go to the gentleman, and then we'll go here next. Just a reminder that folks can ask their questions at texastribune.org/ask, and we have a bit of time here for questions so we can get to them. Please.
Yes, Michael Looney, San Angelo, Texas. Question about the Panhandle fires. If you could answer, I'm curious, approximately how many volunteer fire departments were on scene dispatched? And what is your takeaway with regard to communications between the interagencies and any federal agencies that were on site? I'm curious to know.
Thank you for that question, and that's a lot of what we dealt with in this investigative committee is that communication problem. I don't know for sure the number of fire departments, but it would be 3 figures. Every one of them in the Panhandle. Yes. Surrounding states. Yes, Oklahoma, probably some from Kansas, and so I mean this was certainly a big deal. The biggest problem that we found was that as we've transitioned things in the state of Texas, the Texas Department of Emergency Management operates on a digital radio system. Some law enforcement operates on a digital radio system. Almost none of the volunteer fire departments operate on a digital radio system, which means they can't communicate with each other. And one digital radio cost about $8,000. I'll give an example of what one of the things we found in the investigative committee. One of the local volunteer fire departments got $25,000 a year from the county. Their liability insurance was $17,000. One digital radio is $8,000. That, doesn't cover fuel, tires, any of those kinds of things in that whole deal. So communication becomes a very big issue, not only the communication, but the overall coordination of things, because the natural tendency as state agencies come into an area is to take control. You've had those local volunteer firemen that had been fighting fire 72 hours by the time the cavalry got there. But they know the lay of the land. They know what they're doing and where they are and how to do it. But you've got state agencies that come in and want to take control, and they have the authority statutorily to do that, but then you can't communicate with each other in that environment, and that's where chaos and some of the danger in a fire like this begin to occur in those kinds of things. And we could go hours talking about the heroes that there were in these fires. I mean, there truly were a lot of heroic stories in there, and I don't want to disparage state agencies because they did a great job and they came in to help and they did that. But from a overall coordination standpoint, communication was probably the biggest issue that we dealt with in that whole thing.
So Judge, this may be a little bit more for you. I'm in a county that floods often when Polk County floods. And we faced a lot of the same issues. And our city is, 75% of our city's in the floodplain. So moving's not necessarily an option for people. Going into Hurricane Harvey, our county had the privilege of being the county with the highest number of FEMA non-compliant households in the state of Texas, meaning families that weren't able to maintain flood insurance. And we found some really creative ways to combat that after Harvey with building houses, new houses to take those families out of non-compliance, saw that they withstood the historic winter storm as well. So that was really interesting. They've withstood the winds of Hurricane Beryl. So there are ways of addressing resilience in one type of a disaster that helps in other types of disasters. I also run a nonprofit that is on city-owned property on the Colorado River bank in a park. And everything we build affects our neighbors. It affects us, but it affects our neighbors. And permeable, impervious surfaces are part of that construction, incredibly expensive. But it also takes 3 days for the water to get to us. We don't flood because of the rain we receive. We flood because of the rain Austin receives. And we only have one county to think about below us where the water pours out into the Gulf. Do you have thoughts about what happens upriver and who's the responsibility other counties have for the way they build and the choices they make in managing water in the runoff?
I often think about what happens upriver because I'm also affected by what happens upriver. And so a lot of times, like in the past, we've had someone complain that you should have let water out of Lake Livingston Dam sooner because I had an inch of water in my garage. Well, for every inch of water that's in their garage, there's 3 feet of water in whoever's below the dam. And you can't control the Trinity River. The Trinity River is a river. It's a riverine system. And so what comes into the river, into the lake, and is held to some degree by the dam must exit the river as well. See, so it's not a flood-controlled dam, I guess is part of what I'm saying. So yes, there is some thought to that. And we have shown up before at structures that had FEMA blue, that then that person wanted us to replace the FEMA blue with a new FEMA blue tarp, right? So I understand that the circumstances with those people that are basically low to moderate income, they do not have the capacity, the capability, and sometimes they don't have the energy, to do it, and they certainly don't have the money to move. So we have worked diligently with buyouts and acquisitions to try to get those families relocated. Sometimes they want to go, sometimes they don't. We work very diligently also with other entities that are willing to provide assistance or to purchase those properties and turn them into green space in perpetuity so that you don't have that ongoing issue. It seems like to me, in the short time I've been there, because there are county judges that have been there much longer than I, that we are pulling the same people out of the water every time. We're pulling the same people out of harm's way every time. And so it has not only an economic impact on us, it strains our resources, but it also strains the resources of the entire state of Texas. So you do have to get creative. We have a lot of partnerships. We partner with our churches. We partner with organizations. Heck, I'm on the board for the Houston Wilderness. What do I have to do with the city of Houston? Except for I want them to start thinking about what are you going to do with Harvey? What are you going to do the next time 12 inches of water gets dumped on you and it's not going anywhere and it's not running off? What are you going to do? Because then on top of that, I'm going to send you 125 cubic feet per second. And now you've got Harvey camped out on top of you. So that's why I'm saying we have got to move more proactively. We have some kinks in our reactive response. And it's been my experience that government agencies tend to hoard their territories to some degree or another. but I do think we need, at a state, to become more proactive. You know, when those older citizens move to go live with closer to their children or grandchildren or whatever, buy them out. Take that property to where it will not then become either, you know, a meth house because nobody wants to live there, or it becomes a structure where the next generation moves in and gets flooded out.
Thank you very much, Judge. My name is Ramel Farah. I'm from Hemphill County, from Canadian. And you have hit on the question that I wanted to ask about everyone here with disasters. And that is that the thing we learned is that we can't afford to do this 3 times in the next 10 years. We can't have our ranches burn to the extent that they did this time. And you touched on the ability to not be able to sustain this. And my question was to James, because I know he has some answers there. You gave us answers already, but what are we saying? Andy was the first person who said to me, we can't do this again. Our conversations with James have been, how do we stop this from happening to this extent again? And I'd like for you to have a chance to touch on those answers.
Well, thank you. We've had numerous meetings with numerous state agencies since the hearings of the fires. One, trying to figure out how do we improve communication, how do we improve the overall effectiveness of the agencies and response. But a big part of what we've got to figure out is how do we mitigate fires. Fires are going to have been and always will be part of the Texas Panhandle. As you heard Chairman King say yesterday, he was sure the wind was blowing the day he was born. That's part of the environment that we deal with out there. That's going to happen. But burning 1.3 million acres is not acceptable, you know, to be able to do that. And so we're trying to figure out how do we create mitigation efforts, you know, making sure that the Railroad Commission is taking responsibility for oil well sites, reporting to the Public Utility Commission if things are not safe so we can pull power meters to eliminate those kinds of dangers. And there's a really good place to start. We're working with NCBA, which is a national organization, to go to USDA to try to come up with a program that would mirror the CRP program, which, by the way, is a big part of the problem. The success of the CRP programs created all the fuel for the fires because we stopped the dust from blowing, and now we have a fuel source to burn everything that's there. So can we go in a similar type program with USDA and create mitigation zones where we have a chance to fight those fires? Can we, instead of the Forest Service running up there with equipment that doesn't work in the Panhandle, can we buy road graders, maintainers to come in there to do that firefighting work, you know, instead, and create those kinds of opportunities? And so being able to deal with the fires when they happen, and it goes on with, you know, all of the aerial service in the state of Texas has been in the past contracted through the Bureau of Land Management, and they don't recognize wildfires until March 1st. You know, this one happened February 26th. BLM said, we'll talk to you March 1st when it's wildfire season. You know, which they did, but then it took them 36 hours to get a plane in the air. And so, you know, being able to create zones that we can deal with fires on a basis, and that goes back, you were talking about individual responsibility. That's all of us' responsibility as landowners, is to take that kind of responsibility on and create those environments where we can reduce the possibility of catastrophic loss.
Which applies all over. You know, in y'all's case, it's grass, dust, those kinds of things. It also applies in East Texas to timber. If you have absentee landowners that are just interested in the investment and they're not doing controlled burning, they're not doing any underbrushing, that's, like he explained, the cedars exploding, well, that's what's going to happen. Because you have all this fuel on the ground.
And that is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank our panelists for the very insightful conversation, and thank you all for joining us.